So, you've got an idea for a business, the store of your dreams. There's just one thing to figure out: everything. That's why Shopify's all-in-one commerce platform makes it easy to sell online, in person, and everywhere else. Sell on social media, source products with an app to get that first sale feeling. It's the only solution that gives you everything you need to sell everywhere you want. So when you're ready to bring your idea to life, power it up with Shopify.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/listen.
On episode 6, we talked to 3 different people who came forward about chilling encounters they had face-to-face with Bryan Patrick Miller. His old neighbor recalled when he followed her at night with the zombie hunter police car. A fellow church member described his bizarre demeanor with their youth group, and one of our news photographers recalled the night before and moments during Bryan's arrest. Morgan Loew picks up the investigation and story here in Washington State.
They killed my sister. They took her away from her family, and they're out there free. We never thought that it would take this long.
He said, "If you give me the knife, I won't hurt you." And he then strangled me until I passed out.
This is True Crime Arizona, The Zombie Hunter.
Everett, Washington is a city of 110,000, located about 40 minutes north of Seattle. Nestled between the Olympic and Cascade Mountain ranges on the shore of Puget Sound. It is a picturesque spot, these days known mostly for its giant Boeing plant where they build wide-body jets. But it was a decidedly less technological economy that brought people here 130 years ago.
1892, we had a real boom here because it was the center of the logging industry, which became the sawmill industry.
Gene Fosheim is the past president of the Everett Museum of History and a local historian. He's lived here all his life.
I was born here in 1951, so 70 years now. This is probably one of the most beautiful locations of any city in the United States. We're surrounded by the water on 3 sides. There's a deep water port there, and there's a river that goes all the way up to the little town of Snohomish up a ways. So it was just an ideal location, but it was a lumber industry.
Gene says back then, the lumber and sawmill jobs attracted a rugged, blue-collar workforce.
Everett was known as a very rough town. You had 24 labor unions, you had 24 sawmills, you had strikes going on all the time, and there was some bloodshed, and there were a lot of problems.
The crime rate is still considered high in Everett, so it may not be surprising that 3 seemingly unrelated violent incidents in the early 2000s did not stand out.
I honestly can't say they made the front page of our local newspaper or not. I don't remember.
Alrighty, folks, looks like we're on the ground.
It is those bloody attacks that brought us to Seattle and on to Everett, Washington. Because Bryan Patrick Miller lived here in the early 2000s. It was nearly a decade after the Canal murders in Phoenix. Miller was married and had a baby, but no career to speak of, no steady income. We don't know for sure why he moved to the Pacific Northwest. We do know his grandmother was here, and his mother moved to Everett after she left the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. She married a local guy. We're going to assume Bryan followed his mother here despite their turbulent and some say abusive relationship. And this we know for a fact. Miller's stay in Everett coincided with a series of violent attacks against a teenage girl and 2 women.
Can I get you to say and spell your first and last name?
Victoria Michelson.
Victoria Michelson agreed to meet me on what is known as the Interurban Trail. just yards from where she lived when she was a teenager.
Tell me what this pathway meant to you. Did you ever come out here? Why did you come out here?
I would walk this trail with my good friends in the summer between middle school and high school, and we would go swimming at Silver Lake and go back to my house. My best friend lived right up the street here, and this was a fun, happy trail until that morning of October 9th in the year 2000.
October 9th, 2000 was the morning that changed the rest of Victoria's life. She was just 14 years old back then. She says it was early in the morning before school, and she was walking to her friend's house along the interurban trail. She noticed someone behind her, someone following her. At first, he seemed so far away, and then, in an instant, he was on her.
So he came up behind me, put his arm around my shoulders, cut my neck, and then I was struggling to get away from him, and I was able to step away from him like 2 or 3 feet, and then I turned and kicked my leg up in the air as tall as his head, and I kicked the knife out of his hand like a karate kick. And it flew out of his hand, and it flew like 3 feet down to the ground.
He sees the knife, and you see the knife, and you go for it.
I go for it. I grab it as hard as I can, and I'm like, there's no way. In my mind, I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna give him the knife back. Like, there's no way. But at the end of that 1 minute thought, I just thought to myself, I want this to be over, and I gotta get to school.
You were thinking you had to get to school, that's why.
Yeah.
That's what a 14-year-old thinks.
Yeah.
He tells you if you give him the knife, he'll let you go.
He said, if you give me the knife, I won't hurt you. So I gave him back the knife, and he then strangled me until I passed out, and then, well, he strangled me until I closed my eyes, and then he put my backpack under my head. I remember his hand lifting up my neck and the bottom of my head like it was careful, like it was a pillow or something.
It was like he was using care, like he was posing you.
Yeah.
And then, inexplicably, the attacker walked away and left Victoria there on the ground, bleeding to death. It was just luck, the first luck she had that day, that someone walked by and spotted her.
He said, stay with me. He said, I'm gonna go and call the ambulance and I'm gonna be right back. And he did. I was barely hanging on when the paramedics came. I remember them slapping my face at least 20 times to get me to wake up and try and give them any information that I could.
Victoria had survived a brutal attack. She was stabbed multiple times, endured a painful and humiliating recovery. This 14-year-old had to wear a colostomy bag to school.
And it was horrible. I couldn't eat right, I couldn't sleep right, I was in pain, I couldn't stand up straight. I couldn't stand up straight and I couldn't fucking walk. And kids were mean and they made fun of me. I have no memory of any knife going into my stomach at all. But I have stab wounds and I have scars that go all the way up.
Victoria says she gave police a description of the man who attacked her. He had long, unkempt hair and a beard.
21 years later, and this is a beautiful, serene, peaceful trail. It's hard to fathom the violence, the violent attack that took place here. Back then, investigators thought the attacker was probably a transient because the location of the attack was right between the freeway and a homeless encampment.
Everett police looked and looked. They interviewed lots of people, but never identified a suspect. What they did not know was that in 2000, someone from Arizona had recently moved into Victoria Michelson's apartment complex. Someone with a violent past who had already been convicted once using a knife to stab a woman in Phoenix. It turns out Bryan Patrick Miller lived 100 yards from Victoria's apartment at the time she was attacked. He has never been charged with this, but she believes he is her attacker.
You know what this guy looks like now, the suspect, and you know the sketch that police took from your description. Did your sketch match what he looks like?
The face did. They were looking for somebody that looked like a homeless person with long hair that was unkempt and just a hot mess. They were looking for somebody that looked disgusting, and I'm sure that he came home and showered that day and shaved off all of his head and everything. The fact that they couldn't match his facial description with my picture, the cheekbones, the chin, the eyebrows, the eye sockets, the crooked nose. I remember the face like it was yesterday, and there's no doubt in my mind he needs to pay for what he did.
Bryan Patrick Miller avoided serious police scrutiny in the Victoria Michelson attack. Investigators apparently spoke to him briefly at the time, but that was it. He did, however, not stay off the radar for long. Less than 2 years later, he found himself behind bars facing assault charges.
On May 3rd, 2002, Everett police arrested Bryan Miller after a 25-year-old woman claimed he attacked her with a knife.
The woman's name was Melissa Ruiz Ramirez. She told police she was hitchhiking at night trying to get to a payphone, and Miller picked her up. In the car, she said Miller talked about how the trails and pathways near his apartment complex were dangerous. She said he took her to the building where he worked so she could use the phone. Nobody else was there. She told investigators he came up behind her with a 12-inch serrated knife. There was a struggle. She was stabbed in the back, but she got away and ran to a nearby home.
Hi there. I don't mean to bother you. I'm a news reporter.
We found that home where Ruiz Ramirez banged on the door 19 years ago.
Were you the one who called police when Melissa Ruiz Ramirez showed up?
The same couple live there today. The wife was working in the yard when I approached her.
And so we were wondering if you or your husband may have any interest in talking to us about that experience back then.
The woman said she doesn't remember much, but that Ruiz Ramirez was terrified and injured. The woman's husband called 911. That's about all she would tell me. Back then, it didn't take long for police to track down and arrest Bryan Miller for the attack. He spent months in jail waiting for trial. In front of the jury, Miller claimed Melissa Ruiz Ramirez tried to rob him and that he acted in self-defense. She had a sad, somewhat sordid history. The jury did not believe her, and they acquitted Miller.
There is a lot of evidence that was not presented in this case. Jurors were never told that Bryan Miller was convicted of stabbing somebody in Arizona when he was a teenager. They were not told that he was interviewed in connection to a stabbing that occurred here in Everett on the Inner Urban Trail. We tracked down one of those jurors, and she said they were only allowed to consider the evidence that was presented to them. And she says she wishes she knew the full story about Bryan Miller back then.
Melissa Ruiz Ramirez survived that attack, and we spent a lot of time trying to track her down. Several of the public records we examined seemed to indicate she passed away. What Miller did after he was acquitted of the Ruiz Ramirez attack is a little unsettled. We know he moved back to Arizona, but we are not sure of the exact date. Why is that important? Because there was one more gruesome attack that occurred near Everett. Happened in August of 2004, which was 2 years after the Ruiz Ramirez attack, which was nearly 2 years after the Victoria Michelson attack. And this one bears some striking similarities to the Phoenix Canal murders in its brutality. The victim, a woman named Kelly Jones Sarston. There's not a ton out there about this murder case, so we're hoping that family members might be able to shed some light on what happened. And we're driving about 40 miles north of Everett to talk to two of Kelly Jones Sarston's sisters. While we drove, our producer talked to us about what she found out about the case.
I'm reading the Herald News, and this is an article about Kelly Sarston, and she was 37 years old when she didn't show up to work one day, and so a search ensued, and she was found just a couple days later dead in the river behind her home. It does appear that there was some effort to hide her in the water and maybe weigh her down.
Let's start with this question. What's going through your heads right now as you knew that this interview was coming up and the reason why we're doing this interview? Maybe we'll start with Judy.
What's going through my head is realizing how long it's been since Kelly died. And the unfinished questions of who killed my sister. When it happened, we never thought that it would take this long, ever.
Judy Wolf is Kelly Sarston's sister. She and their other sister, Sandy Fredericks, agreed to meet us to talk about the idea that Bryan Miller might be the killer.
You know, I made a promise to Kelly that I would do whatever it took and would continue this as long as needed until her killer was found.
Kelly Sarston lived 5 miles outside Everett in a home she bought herself along the Pilchuck River.
Kelly was an ace of diamonds. She was bright, happy, energetic, was always there for people when they needed her.
Her sisters describe her as a big blonde bombshell, and she had a unique career path. She was a beautician turned dump truck owner and driver.
Did she like driving that dump truck? Did she like that company?
Oh yeah, especially when my dad would come see her. She thought that was the coolest thing to show my dad. We have some good pictures of that.
What can you tell me about the day in 2004 that you heard the news that maybe she was missing?
I was in Eastern Washington, and I got a call in the morning, and I knew my mom doesn't call that early when she knows I'm away. And she just told me that something happened and Kelly's missing, and I just lost it.
When did you find out that she had been murdered?
I knew it from the beginning. I knew it from the beginning when we were standing there, you know, in the neighbor's yard, looking over the river there. I just knew what they were doing was not looking for, you know, just a missing person.
Investigators told the family there was evidence of a disturbance in Kelly's home. Then they found her in the river. Her body had been mutilated.
They established that it's a murder, and you expect somebody to be arrested immediately.
In a perfect world, yes.
How does it affect the people left behind when a case is not solved?
Well, it's kind of a cliche to say that we didn't get closure. I don't know. It's just so maddening that whoever did it has been free for this long. They killed a vital person in this world who had plans in life. They killed my sister. They took her away from her family and her friends. And they're out there free. It's not fair.
At this point in the interview, I turned the topic to Bryan Patrick Miller. When we reached out to Judy and Sandy, we told them we were looking into attacks and murders that appeared to fit Miller's pattern. At least the pattern police say he has. Sandy and Judy then took some time to read up about Miller, and they spoke to the detective assigned to their sister's case.
The MO's definitely similar. But was he here? I don't know.
Investigators have told us that they don't believe that Miller was responsible for your sister's death, but you still think it's important to come forward and talk about this case. Why is it important?
Because we don't want it to get forgotten, and we want people to know that we're still looking.
And because they could be wrong. Who knows?
We came to Everett, Washington, looking for answers. We ended up with more questions. We found 3 cases, 2 of them unsolved, and one where Bryan Patrick Miller admitted to stabbing a woman, but claimed it was self-defense and was acquitted. And at this point, everyone on our team felt like we hadn't really found out much about Miller himself during this trip.
We know Bryan Miller lived here for a couple of years at least. Is there anybody left in this community who he has any attachment to?
Well, I know in his bail review hearing, they talked about ties to the community and his grandmother who lived here, his mom and his stepdad who just lived down the street. His mom has passed, but maybe there's a chance his stepdad's still around.
That conversation with our team is how I found myself walking up the path to Bryan Miller's stepfather's Everett home. A man in his late 60s or early 70s answered the door in his undershirt.
Hi there. I'm looking for James Flores. My name's Morgan Loew, and I'm an investigative reporter with a TV station in Phoenix. I wanted to ask him about his stepson. Are you James?
It turns out it was Miller's stepfather. He said he didn't want to be recorded, but he spoke to me for a few minutes. Afterwards, I described the conversation to our team.
Seemed like a nice guy and didn't shy away from talking. He just said he didn't want to do an on-camera interview.
Did you know anything about Bryan and the time spent here? How did he describe him?
He said he was mellow, said didn't come off as having any sort of remarkable characteristics, and that he was surprised at the accusations, and he was caught off guard by Bryan's history. He did not say Bryan's innocent. He did not say there's no way he's capable of doing something like that, and I think that's telling.
It turns out we are not the only ones interested in Bryan Patrick Miller's time in Everett. The stepfather told me investigators from Miller's defense team had come to town and spoken with him, and detectives from the Phoenix Police Department visited Victoria Michelson, and they have indicated they believe Miller is the man who attacked her on the interurban trail. But the statute of limitations has expired for him to be charged in that attack.
If he never faces the charges, if he never goes to court for attacking you, but he's convicted in Arizona, is that enough for you?
Yeah, because he will still be sentenced and dealt with and get the death penalty, and to me, that's karma.
Hey guys, it's host Brianna Whitney. Morgan and I will be off for the holidays, but we'll be back with new exciting episodes on January 3rd. True Crime Arizona: The Zombie Hunter is hosted by me, Brianna Whitney.
And me, Morgan Loew. Sergio Hernandez is the producer.
It's a production of Arizona's Family, CBS 5, 3TV, and azfamily.com in Phoenix, Arizona.